Jabu 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 jabu.
Shabu 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 shabu. Shabu 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 shabu.
Jabu 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 jabu.
Shabu shabu. This can't be the cold open. It needs to be a little more than that. Otherwise, people will listen and be like, what the hell is happening? Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of Muprov Musings. This is episode number 7, and my name is Hal Munker, and joining me now on the line is Julian Bernardo.
Hello, everybody. I am joining you on the line for the 7th episode, but look, it's not just me. We have a wonderful guest, another former member of our improv troupe. How about you say a little bit about yourself, Kaelyn?
Hello, hello. Yeah, I'm Kaylin. Super excited to be here. I always love getting to talk with y'all and just I love talking just more about improv because I feel like it all goes by so fast. But when we actually talk about like what's going on in our heads and like how we're feeling and like the motions, like it's just so fun to me. So yeah.
And Kaelyn, obviously you are an expert in many things, but why are we having you on today? What is a certain realm of improv that you have lots of experience in?
Yeah, so I heard that I would be talking a bit about physical improv today, which I'm super excited about. Yeah, it's weird. I didn't really start dance until I reached college. But I think like being able to like tap more into like physical movement, using our bodies to kind of like thinking more about like how do we like create a world? How do we create effects? Is something super interesting to me. And also just like, yeah, how do we like really get into like the delightfulness of improv because like we have so much free like room to roam and like we could be on a crazy planet that spews lava. We could literally be the crayons in the box. Yeah, that's something like I did a very different style of improv growing up. I was in this competition called That Station Imagination, and the improv challenge, they really promoted that kind of like playing like at different scales or like playing inanimate objects. So I feel like a lot of that comes from that too. So.
All
And
right. We're
worry
all
not,
doing the same
guests.
thing.
We are still doing the hero's journey. If you are hearing this and you're thinking, how the frick does this tie back into anything that we've talked about so far? Physical improv is actually going to tie in very largely to the hero's journey. Uh, if you remember where we left off, do you remember where we left off, Al?
Yeah, we were just talking about the ordinary world and worldviews. And today we're going to be talking you through both the call to adventure. That's going to come actually in the second half of the episode because we're starting out with Kaylin Strong for crossing the threshold. This is going to be the transition from the ordinary world into the special world. And it is really great to hit these scenes hard with crazy special effects, maybe a giant car chase or maybe a magical portal or the building is collapsing and you're running out of it or however you're crossing the threshold. But usually there is no way for the hero to return to their ordinary world. So if you are able to create effects physically on stage with your bodies and have the ensemble create those effects, that's super cool. But Julian, we've also left out what the heck we're talking about when we say physical improv.
Yeah.
So
What,
Kaylin,
you just mean like space objects? That's it?
yeah, not quite. Physical improviser was a term that we brought in during a new play because Kaylin, your role in a new play was different from and if you're just tuning in now, a new play was a show we did that was a little out there. But Kaylin, your role during that was sort of like a mix between maybe like a musical improviser and or a lighting like you were kind of doing a lot. You were verbally, physically creating effects on stage, right?
Yeah, I feel like I would most closely align myself with like being like improvising the set. Because we'd be creating the set, but also we'd be doing like special effects, like kind of like using dance to show characters' emotions, but there's also like kind of like a like directorial aspect in like bringing actors on stage or like saying like lightning struck. So kind of like very also environment world building aspect of physical improv.
Yeah, and we talk a lot of in this podcast about comparing the stories that we create to like movies or plays or things like that you see. And those mediums have the benefit of, in a movie you can have an epic explosion that you do with visual effects or practically, or on stage even you can, create these very interesting sets. But with improv, we can't really do that in the same way. And so this, I think, fills in that kind of spectacle hole that there is in improv. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, we've talked a lot on the show about making things that are epic. And when people go see a hero's journey movie, a lot of times what they're looking for is a crazy boat or, a car chase or a magical giant CGI effects. And we're going to be sort of talking about how you can create an experience like that and fill in those. Because if you just see the journey without any of the combat effects and that kind of cool stuff, it's not going to feel as exciting. Part of it is adventure and excitement.
And so, Kaelyn, how would you say like you feel an improv scene is different when there is a lot of the like physical improv that you're going to talk about versus when there isn't? Like, what do you think it can add, I guess?
I think it it definitely adds a very theatrical element.
Mhm.
It very much distinctly feels like it does make the present moment feel like a little more magical. Like this is like yeah, which is interesting. Which I would like a big thing we talked about in New Play with physical improvisers is like don't just run out there and start like being the wind for every scene just because you want to. Like be really tasteful and like although this is hard because like you're like don't get to in your head and think, but also like working on practicing and practices like practice the skill of like when am I needed? So because sometimes like yeah, I feel like having physical improvisers like maybe like physical improvisers coming and being the wind, it really escalates the power of the wind where you have literal you can see the weight and push and pull and you have actual like people creating that. It creates a very I think it's like a very like intense like it becomes more emotional and magical, but at the same time I feel like I would caution like I feel like I would not enter a scene and be the harsh wind on someone when they're having a very like grounded emotional conversation with another character. It depends on what you're going for. But I also think I think it does kind of get the audience like the audience does register like oh this is a little different from reality if that makes sense.
And and that all totally makes sense. But let's walk it back a little bit. Because a lot of the people who are listening, if you do improv, you might be very used to sort of talking head style improv where everybody's playing a character and the concept of being the wind might be a little bit foreign, right? Coming in and being the harsh wind on a conversation. Yes, people might not know what you mean by that, I think. So yeah, what is that?
Did you want to say something, Hal?
Yeah, one of the with particularly with the wind, one of the things that we practiced during a new play was this idea of kind of imagine at a point late in the show, some character is lost or something like that, and there's a giant storm, and the protagonist is going out into the storm to seek whoever is lost, and suddenly all of the physical improvisers, or in your case, all of the members of the ensemble who are not the protagonist or the person who is being sought, can come flying across the stage, spinning with their whole bodies, making wind sounds, and then physically pressing against the character who's walking forward. So rather, you can only walk forward for a couple steps before you're off the stage, but you can physically be pushing and actually applying pressure to each other and being held in place. And that person can be calling out and building with their words a bigger and bigger monologue and then the physical improvisers build their sound in their body, and then something that they say might break it, and suddenly there's a calm. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I think saying it like that, it kind of occurs to me that um, people who are listening might have experience with, embodying some of these forces, but for like a comedic reason, because I think a lot of improv does that kind of thing where, you might try to embody this thing that isn't a character necessarily. But yeah, it's for like a joke or something like that. But I think the thing that's different here and the thing to keep in mind is that this is all for like kind of dramatic purpose. And it's definitely not going to be tongue in cheek. It's like it's a full commitment kind of thing.
So
Yeah, yeah. And like something else I think about, like as I was talking about this, is if you've seen Ghibli movies, Studio Ghibli movies, this is very similar, which like I can't think of literally the forces of nature are
Mm-hmm.
kind of like creatures. I remember in Ponyo when like the storm and the waves are rising, like the waves have eyes and you can kind of see how they're like reaching, coming short, and they're slipping and sliding, like kind of like these tentacles coming out, that they're like these creatures, these literal forces of
Yeah.
nature that have a soul. I mean, that can up to you if you want the nature to be embodied and like be have souls, or if just like you're having like improvisers play these forces of nature. But that's just something I think of that can help make that connection.
And Kaelyn, would you also be able to explain the sort of emotional amplification? We've talked about, playing someone's hair or their ears or, their wings or, playing the environment in the room. And like, how does that work with the character's emotion and the physical players?
Yeah, so I think yeah, off the top of my head, for emotional amplification, a big thing I think of is like kind of like it gets more into the realm of like maybe like theater, like plays versus movies, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
We had a practice in which like I think the most compelling example actually did happen in a show where we had this character improviser was talking about kind of like it was kind of like a tense moment where her friend group was kind of like it was a little falling things like were falling apart, the night was going wrong, and she's monologuing about how she's sitting in the back of the car and talking about kind of like being a little like this like being a little claustrophobic, and with all these things combined feeling kind of like the darkness settling in and like what it feels like to be claustrophobic, but also like taking in the motions of like friendships dissolving. And so at that point, all the physical advisors went to her and we used our arms and then we kind of wrapped our arms around her body, kind of like the darkness and her fear is literally like consuming and kind of like choking her a bit. Obviously, we did not choke her. We worked on like consent and intimacy and all that stuff. That's super important when you do this. Super important.
Yeah.
But we can get a little later. But yeah, like where you could we're literally showing you what's going on inside someone's head. And I remember that one was so tense. I heard some of the audience being like, "Oh shit." So I was like, yes, like really going for the moment to really like, yeah, the dramatic tension that's going on for these characters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it almost is like the music in that maybe
Mhm.
at first you're following along, you're cued that we're in a more emotional moment, but then you guys can also set the tone of like if you are playing, the cluster, the wind outside the car, you can make the scene become anxious by going rather than
Yeah.
uh and you could really have control both ways.
I have a leading question, um, which what I'm going to say is that I think that preparing as an ensemble for this kind of improv and like knowing that this is something that you're going to do is very important. And my question is, have either of you ever come on stage as like what's supposed to be like a force of nature or like, some sort of non-character thing and then been endowed as a character in a scene? Because that would be my worry if I was like if I heard this podcast and my troupe doesn't listen to it, I was like, okay, next time I'm gonna come out and I'm gonna be the anger beating from his head, and then I step on and they're like, hey George, I don't know exactly if you guys can recall that, but the communication there I think is important.
Yes, for sure. That kind of thing has happened to me. Like 90% of the time when I walk on stage, someone does something different than what I was expecting. And that's the point of improv.
Right.
Like just in the last 5 year show that we did with Kaelyn, I came on just as a character. I wanted us to be in a roller coaster. And then Kaelyn had picked up on the fact that she had been taking the bus in the previous scenes and had been endowed that she was always late because she was taking the bus. And endowed that we were in a car, and it became this scene about teaching Kaelyn how to drive. And it was like
God, I
perfect for the story.
this is perfect to talk about improv. I did not think of that hit. I was not that smart. I was just like, we're buckling our seatbelts. We're sitting. Oh, I guess my first instinct was car, and then afterwards, I was like, oh my god, how you put it together? Right? I've been taking the bus. I need to learn to drive. Like, yeah. So another great example of like how we're all helping each other out.
Yeah, so you don't really lose value if you come on as the wind and someone's like George. The only way you lose value is if the other player that you're playing with is less perceptive than the audience. If they're less perceptive than the audience, then the audience will notice that a mistake has happened. But as long as your group is like the skill of being an improviser is being more perceptive than the audience. So if the improviser is making a mistake, hopefully the audience doesn't notice it.
Yeah.
But we practiced a lot about going in and doing things fast and grabbing the focus for a second, getting out enough information to make it precise what you're doing, and then giving the focus back. And we'll talk about some of those exercises.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of in the abstract reality right now, talking about some of this stuff. How about we talk about something concrete, like an exercise that people could do to get people to think about like how they might flex this muscle.
Can we talk if we're going concrete about Lumiere?
Yes, that's a perfect thing
All
to talk
right.
about.
Kaelyn, do you want to explain the Lumiere?
Yeah, what is the Lumiere?
Yeah. So really quick, we've been talking about very like magical worlds, kind of,
Yeah.
or like very like abstract emotional kind of use of physical improv. But physical improv is also super fun and delightful for just more concrete like objects. Which I know people usually like yes, it can be very humorous, but it can also be like done in a more serious way or a grounded way. And so the Lumiere was a format that was created by our dear friend John Mistley, who I wish were here, but John Mistley was also a very physically inclined improviser. And this format was essentially objects come to life. It was a lot of emphasis on like the spatial world and kind of like our relationships with the space, the physical space as improvisers, which not a lot of people focus on, but helping develop like a more like fleshed out world, but also like having improvisers play the objects. And like we could be playing objects like just to show them, or we could be playing objects as like they can like talk and like they're like there's these rocks that talk, or like I remember one of our practices, the dust bunny, like the dust bunnies on the carpet are very sad that they're being swept away, things like that.
Yeah, I think there's no way to talk about the Lumiere without talking about one of the fun physical improv possibilities that you can do, which is like multi-person physical improv.
Yes.
The Giga Dragon, you could say.
Yes.
And John, in his practices, spent a whole practice on multi-person physical creatures.
Yeah.
He spent an entire practice on playing objects realistically with your full body. He is a very strange person. We love him dearly. I was like, what is happening in these practices? We were not so if
I
you
loved it.
No, I loved it too, but it was like this is very different from what we would normally do in an improv practice. And if your group has time, it is so worth it, because in every later show that we've done since then, if we see 3 or 4 people who are in the cast of the Lumiere, we know that we can create a multi-body entity. And what do we mean when we say the Giga Dragon multi-body entity? Like what is that?
Yeah, so 6, 5. What's the number of people that comprise the Giga Dragon?
I was the mouth of the Giga Dragon. With
Well,
my
there was a
whole
mouth?
body was the mouth, and I would do the talking of it, and my arms were going.
There's a mouth, 2 eyes, and
Wings.
yeah, at
And
least 2 people on wings.
I think there was a nostril. I think there was a mouth that would open and talk. There was one person who was using both their hands to be the nostrils that would sort of flare out whenever it was breathing fire.
Mm-hmm.
There were 2 people that were using both of their hands as eyes, and they were opening and shutting their hands like eyelids.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were 2 people who were being the wings that were flapping.
Mm-hmm.
And this Giga Dragon flew through the whole audience.
Yeah, like us like all breathing and moving together, like this monster that's like preparing to like eat. And like when we flew around in the audience, like this is like such a great example of how like, yeah, like physical improv, like whenever I describe to people, they think it's really funny. But like this is a great example of like that it is captivating and magical and breathtaking and just like you can't pull your eyes away from it. Like it's where like you're not laughing at it, you're like enraptured by it.
One of John's motivations when we were doing this, and if you're trying to think about like different multi-body creatures you can do, one good source is if you know the video game Dark Souls, or Elden Ring is like the more popular one that came out recently. Look up bosses from that game because those are like huge creatures that one person couldn't be. So you have to do some brainstorming of like, okay, this thing has like, 2 torsos and like 6 different tentacles that are extending in different directions. There were totally times in practice where we were like workshopping like how to do certain things. And that was a lot of it, I feel like.
We would pick a creature, like John would be like, okay, you are now going to be a horse with 6 legs. And he'd be like, yeah. All right, so how do all 3 legs on one side move and then all 3? No. So which legs move? Maybe the front left moves at the same time as the middle right and the back left is kind of how 6-legged creatures walk, I think. And then, bears walk with both their legs in sync, whereas I think cats maybe walk with opposite legs and stuff like that. You can kind of figure it out. It just depends on how much time you want to dedicate to it. But basically, how we practice this is a problem-solving mentality where we take a problem and we solve it, and we take a problem and then we solve it, and we talk through it while we're solving it with our bodies, and we break up into little teams, and all the teams come back and show what they solved. And eventually you get to the point where you can solve it on stage instantaneously without needing to talk through it.
Yeah, and on the note of like figuring out how to make things work, I think a huge part of it is making sure everyone is comfortable. Having conversations about like I don't know if you guys mentioned this, but before we do a show or like even like practice where there's a lot of like physical intimacy might be involved, we do a consent circle where like don't touch me here. I'm comfortable with like combat or being kissed or anything. But like for this, yeah, especially like where people are not comfortable being touched and respecting that and really practicing like making sure like we're like being safe and respectful of each other. I think it's super important. Like if you're doing this with like a new ensemble you've created, really having the conversation and like making sure everyone feels comfortable first is super important.
Yeah, in terms of safety as well, like our cast was all sorts of different, shapes and sizes. And for some of these creatures, we were, maybe I can like hold you up partially or stuff like that. Like that is something that you should definitely never go in and be like, we need a falcon, so I'm going to pick this person up, or those kinds of things. Like you really do need to iron out and figure out as an ensemble beforehand.
Yeah, figure out who's a flyer, who's a base, who doesn't want to be involved anywhere in the pyramid.
Yeah. And one other thing about while we're still on multi-object creatures, then I have an exercise I want to queue up. Sometimes it's going to look stupid. That's the whole problem solving of it all. So if you start like trying this and you're like, this looks stupid, or like I'm not really feeling it right now. That was like a lot of the work we did was like moving past things. It's not that it just doesn't work. Like, yeah, sometimes it maybe technically works, but it looks stupid. And you need to develop some familiarity together as an ensemble and familiarity with like your own kind of physical body of how like doing different things looks.
And you still want one person as the character, unless it's like a 3-headed monster and the joke is that the 3 heads say different things. Like if your thing has 1 head, you want one person who's doing most of the sort of talking, and everyone else is amplifying. And you notice still if your tail droops, that might affect how you talk. That you might get sadder. But I think that it's good to
And
have.
then,
Yeah.
yeah, another great thing on this note is like appendages, which is basically what these mega monsters are, just blown up to a bigger scale. But like physical improv can also be like appendages is super fun. Like just pop in and be someone's wings, be like their antlers or whatever. And yeah, it's just like a super fun way to create like more interesting and delightful characters as well.
Meow, meow, meow. Exercise alert, exercise alert. Here's an exercise incoming that I think will be helpful for all of you to figure out how you can try to embody different things. It's the whisper object exercise. Do one of you want to talk through how the whisper object exercise works?
I can talk through the opening, and Kaelyn can handle the second part. So I
Yeah.
would go up to Kaelyn, and I would whisper in Kaelyn's ear so that no one else could hear it. Something like, pencil sharpener. And what would you do with that, Kaelyn?
Yeah, and then I would really quickly, like, I don't have a lot of time to think because we gotta keep going. I'd immediately figure out how can I be a pencil sharpener and get everyone to guess that. So yeah, like in terms of how you might execute that, yeah, like thinking about like the shape of things. If you're not able to emulate, oh, also size too. Like if this is a really small object, I could be just using my fingers, but if it's a big object, I'm using my whole body. I said shape and kind of like also thinking about like sound, using sound effects,
Ooh,
like that's going like and notice how I'm doing that. Well, okay, this is a podcast. You can't see my hand. But as I just made that sound, I started doing this rotating motion with my fingers that was kind of like it was following the sound effects. Like it was kind of like not a smooth motion. It was kind of like there's like abrupt lilts at every step of it. And so thinking about like also with just like how you're moving your body to kind of emulate that as well.
Ooh, I have another exercise alert from Lumiere that I just remembered. Because we're going to be talking about crossing the threshold today. And often that threshold is literal. Like you are literally entering into a portal, or you're traveling through a cave, or you're jumping off of a flying airplane or whatever. And one of the big things that happened in Lumiere was people playing the walls of narrow spaces. So you were going through a tunnel and you would be pushing your way through 4 or 5 improvisers who were making a tunnel out of their body. There's a funny moment, and I was rewatching some of the shows where Julian enters like as a stalagmite, and I enter as a stalactite. And then we realized that we both said the wrong one, and we have to like switch places really fast. But yeah, that kind of thing where.
And so what's the exercise?
Oh, the exercise is we would choose a space. I think a cave is a really great one to start out with. And it's sort of like the dream, how in a dream you don't actually remember anything before you and anything after you. You only need the part of the cave that the person is walking through. So you kind of have one person walking through a cave and interacting with it, and everyone else is building the cave around them. The second they walk through a part, that part disappears and runs around to the front to build more cave. And you should be able to show with your body if the tunnel is forking or getting really narrow, so you have to crawl through it, or widening out into a cavern. And you can do this. John made us do it with a supervillain's lab. Any number of things, any big space where it has a lot of things you can physically interact with, doors and turning things and whatever.
And there's like some shared control here, which I think mirrors how it'll actually go in the show, which is like somebody who is walking through it can like endow like, oh, hey, I see that thing to whatever level of specificity, or someone else can just come on and be the thing, and then the person can say what they see. So that's a fun thing to play with back and forth.
Yeah, totally.
One, just to bring the delight back into it, as we're kind of in this world of talking about playing with the Lumiere, Kaelyn, what were some of your favorite and not even just in the Lumiere, but some of your favorite non-character like things you've embodied over the years? Because I mean, you rip it so often.
Yeah, I guess wait, so
Any non-character, anything within this kind of physical improv regime.
yeah, I feel like the number one thing that comes to mind is one of our Hero's Journey shows, the fantasy one. Super fun. What I mainly remember was playing a waterfall. We were in a mermaid
Ooh.
cove. That was super fun. I think like the lighting was like such a big part of it. And I wanted to get up there and like support like it was this cool mystical kind of environment. And so I was making like the wave motions and like the I think I know we call it physical improv, but to me, it's really just world building improv
Yeah.
because I feel like sound is such an important thing, and I feel like I think like talking about kind of like texture, and that's something we want to get into is super important. Like yeah, like I was like matching the like you could hear how the quality of my waves splashing sounded. I moved my arms in a similar manner to match that, where it's kind of like it's a little more slow and a little more flowy. Um yeah, and I think yeah, and another thing I did was like they were talking about like the mermaids are like, oh, we found this shiny sword. Let's put it with our other treasures in the waterfall. And then kind of like interacting with them, like I extended my arms as like the waves kind of wrapping up the sword and holding it and making sounds of like the shiny object when it was pointed out. Like I'd go shing, shing, shing. So that you would know that too.
Yeah, sound is, and yeah, and making the texture is so real. It's good to center it around the whole like experience rather than just the physical things that you're doing.
And texture is a word that we use a lot, or at least it's a word that I use a lot to describe a show. Because it's very easy to talk about the plot of a show,
Mhm.
and it's very easy to talk about like kind of the energy of a show and stuff like that. But the texture of the show is kind of those little details that just get wormed in, and it's how the crispness of your fireball special effect, or the slight accent that your character has, or the sound of running water, or the way you turn on the tap, those kind of, or just the background characters and the way, the world building of it all.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about an exercise for this? The LeBron?
Ooh, exercise alert.
Exercise alert.
Yeah, I think yeah, just thinking about texture and tone is super, super important. I think for like people who come from musical background and you're used to like reading like sheet music talks about like they want it like cantabile, which is like more like a little more like insular and kind of like more soft and contained and sweet versus like oh my god, they're all escaping me. All my years of music are escaping me. But I think dance we're gonna say something, Hal?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. But I think dance is also similar language with like, is this a slice or is this a yeah, is this a slice or is this like another man? Anyways, Laban is a great exercise where basically you have everyone's walking around the room and we have different sliders we can play with. Can y'all help me remember some sliders?
Sure. The Laban sliders, there are four of them, but we tend to use three of them because two of them are a little similar. One of them is speed, uh, and that is both speed in terms of like how fast your character is moving, but it can also be micro speed, like how fast they like touch their hair and stuff like that. And I think the Laban words are like quick and strong for the two ends of that spectrum, or something like that. But you can think about it, if you're entering at the most simple point, is just how fast does your character move. Uh, Another one uh, is kind of the weight, uh, light versus, maybe that was the light versus strong. I don't think there's one that's called heavy, but physically adjusting and playing characters that are sort of different weights than you. And I don't mean that like just in terms of like how much this person weighs, but like playing the control, you should have your footfalls stepping pretty differently. And is if you're put on a backpack, your footballs should kind of hit differently. And if you're playing a fairy, you should be skirting around. And then Laban also has the bound versus unbound. I think that's the complicated one that we ignore. But direct versus indirect, I think, is the last one. If you're walking somewhere, do you walk straight there, or do you kind of take a winding, twirling path? If you are asking someone a question, do you ask them exactly what you're thinking, or do you like, hey, I noticed that it smells a little funky in the room today. I just something that I noticed. That would be an indirect way to bring.
So
Yeah.
we're walking around the room. What does all that have to do with this, Kaelyn? All those things we just said.
Yeah, what you can do is kind of like take one slider at a time and kind of like tell people try like you could set like a scale of like 1 to 10. Like 1 is like the speed, 1 is the slowest, and 10 is the fastest. And like give them like let's start like with like a 1, kind of walk around and feel how it feels, and then shift to like maybe 5. Oh, maybe you try a 9. How does that feel? And then you can do it with each of those different sliders. And then you can start to combine the sliders. Like, let's say I was like, okay, why don't we try a character that walks quickly, indirect, and light? And so just everyone's walking around, no one's looking at each other, everyone's doing their own thing, trying to experiment. And then once we do that, we will tell people, okay, shout out what, like, usually when you do something, oh, what character this could be. But for this, I especially encourage when you're thinking about characters, they don't have to be human. Like you could have like we've had words like, oh, someone's like, I am a feather flying in the air. Or like maybe I'm like a heavy horseshoe or something.
Yeah, I'm the boulder tumbling down the hill. Like things like that, like images that might evoke some of these sliders. And yeah, you can mix and match. I think in the actual like Laban reality, there are like certain terms for different combinations. Am I right about that? Like there's a punch or
yeah, that's what I think when Kaelyn was talking about slicing, I think she might have been thinking slashing. Slashing is yeah, and we might do a whole Laban episode at some point as a kind of one-off thing. But for Lumiere, John was making up all these sliders. He used some of the Laban ones, and he was just any quality that you can think of, age is one right off the dome, but really anything that you can think of, height.
Amount of tension that they're holding might be a good one.
Yeah.
Tension that they're holding. Yeah. Yeah. Any sort of slider, like where you can think about two kind of opposite points on a spectrum would be suitable for your own personal Laban.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think in the interest of time, I want us to talk about like portals and maybe more generally how some of this physical improv stuff might apply toward crossing the threshold.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like multiple times in different shows, one of the most basic images that we could have is just a really big door that some of the improvisers are portraying. And like when crossing the threshold, people might open this big door. It's a very basic way that you might use this physical improv to cross the threshold. What other ways can we think of?
I definitely think I love chases. And physically, two people have to be still or running in place and the other people have to be flying by them. Or if you have chairs and you can do cars or planes or any of that stuff and you're bumping your body and you're changing, you can even have people pushing the chairs, like who are right behind the chairs pushing them. You have people, making this and using their narrative voices. But I feel like getting kind of good at being able to rapidly flee across the threshold is a high action way to.
Yeah, like if you're you might even be driving a car and things are like players are like coming into the foreground and then falling back. I'm sure this is existed.
We did that.
Oh, did we?
Yes, it was the modern show for like the crossing the threshold was driving from New Jersey to New York.
Oh yeah. Yeah, wait, talk a little bit about that because that's not magical at all.
Yeah, it
Kind
was
of.
super fun because it's still, yeah, it's like making like, our ordinary world like transition, like the cross special in a magical way. It was, we had like, so I was one of the characters, and like we're both like sitting in a car, so like two chairs facing the audience straight on like center stage. And then we have like, then we started like pointing out, we're like, oh look, there's the Empire State Building. And then someone just came on the Empire State Building, and they kind of like did like, they're kind of like going farther, like they started at like close to the audience, and they got farther and farther away from the audience. So that was really delightful.
That I'm sure this has existed forever, but that just to spread the Simps love, that technique has always to me been attributed to a Simp of yore named JKK. So JKK, if you're listening to this, we know that you did this way back in the day, and the legend still lives on.
In the Lumiere show itself, the one that we did, I think the threshold was a entrance to a cave that dripped acid.
Oh,
And
that was so
if you
fun.
had to
Oh,
cross it, I think one of the characters had to shelter the other person and kind of sacrifice to get them across the
oh,
threshold.
yeah,
Um, and oftentimes the book that we were talking about suggests that there's often a threshold guardian, some sort of
right.
character who is stopping you, or literally the threshold itself is like a magic mirror or something that can talk. And the threshold guardian often usually starts as an adversary and then might be kind of absorbed into the character and become kind of an ally. And eventually the drippy poison doors were helpful in trying to keep the villain from crossing the same threshold, and kind of became an ally through how they confronted them, is my memory. I think they got through it by befriending the doors, and then the villain got through it by sacrificing their lackey.
Oh, oh my gosh. And yeah, just like that threshold with like, yeah, in the Lumiere, it was like a cave that like dripped acid. I think like techniques for like really, because the crossing threshold is such like a magical moment. It's so exciting. And like to me, the more exciting, like yeah, using your bodies to create it, but also like I think a big thing was like like we talked about like narrative bursts, kind of like more like just stating things. Because
Mm.
like in like yeah, sometimes like we want to be like, it's like magical and imply and like, but sometimes you just straight up say it, and that's perfectly fine because we're in the world of improv. And it is also like possible, like versus like saying we have a cave and it's dripping a lot of acid, like you could totally say it like that, that's fine. But if you feel like you want to make it more magical and fitting the tone, you could be like, there lies a cave, and from the tips of the rocks drips a strange green acid. So kind of like you're still a storyteller, and then using that tool to help you, as well as like making the sound of the acid drips. So there's so much at your disposal to make a fun threshold.
And bringing back some of the emotional amplification stuff, I feel like often this narration burst that we're talking about, where people come in and they say like something that's happening. One that comes to mind that I feel like must have happened at some point is like there's a storm happening, and you come in like very like serious, like the storm is coming. You have some great like anticipation and like weight to your voice when you say it, so you can think about the emotion that this like threshold is creating in your character and try to evoke that in the way that you state the narration.
Mm-hmm. If you've ever practiced using space objects, there's an idea of clicking on and clicking off. And the most important moments in using a space object are the moments of contact. When your hand suddenly touches something, you really want to kind of click and add a little extra. And that is true with narration bursts. Your goal is to get in and out without disrupting the scene or thinking that another character enters. So you want your first word, if if it's there's a storm, or like a storm blows across the sky, you'd be like, a storm crashes, like, and that part's
Mm-hmm.
way louder than the rest of it. And then a storm crashes across the sky, lightning bolts, and suddenly the protagonist enters. And right when you say enters, you turn your whole head and body and you give that focus back to them. And when you take the focus with a storm, you probably want to make your body large and foregrounded. So you want to either move forward. I often throw my fist into the air. I'm a very tall person. And when I do that, I have the focus. And then when I let go of the focus, I throw my hand out open towards whoever I want to give the focus to. But
Mm-hmm.
you want the burst to be quick, loud, clicked on, and physically embodied, of get the attention and then make yourself as small as possible and disappear.
And This is all great threshold talk, and we shouldn't get too big for our britches. But while we're talking physical improv and while we have Kaelyn here, I think it would be good to talk a little bit about right after crossing the threshold and maybe just in general while you're in the special world, how you can use some of these physical improv techniques to make the special world feel special and different from the ordinary world. So, yeah, go ahead, Al.
Yeah, I had an idea for this. You're not going to like this, Julian, so I'm not setting you up well. Kaelyn, have you read Harry Potter?
Yeah.
So the first book of Harry Potter, at the end of it, there is a series of challenges, kind of like our test allies and enemies that we're going to get to, where 7 Hogwarts teachers have created 7 magical tasks to try to prevent them from getting to the end. So they basically cross 7 thresholds in a row, kind of in some ways. And all of them are things that we could physically create. So the first one is a 3-headed dog. We've already talked about that. There's a big sleeping 3-headed dog that would be played by 3 improvisers. You go through a trap door that maybe is played by a 4th improviser. The second one is Devil's Snare, which is a giant living plant that wraps around you and holds you tight. Kaelyn, how would you go about making that?
Ooh.
A giant plant that wraps around you and holds you tight. Ooh.
And like chokes you, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's a kind of like it's no surprise at this point. I'm always playing like a tree or a plant so often. So yeah, there's just something about them, guys. Yeah, I always like hit the pose where like using my hands, kind of like the leaves or the branches, and like really like this kind of creature that like begins from the floor, like begins from the roots planted in the ground and kind of eventually like slowly moving, and like moving, but like moving slowly and measured and kind of like in a way where it's like imagine like if you like ever see like a time lapse of like a plant bud blooming breaking from the soil, kind of like that kind of movement. I'm really thinking about how do these things actually move, and kind of like imagine yourself like stretching and like waking up and kind of like extending and reaching out slowly. And yeah, I would say my style of movement is also very flowy, which comes in a lot. We are talking about like the textures was like Laban. Yeah, thinking about like, yeah, and what character would this thing move? And yeah.
All right, Kaelyn, if your texture is flowy, the next Harry Potter challenge is a room full of flying keys that move almost like hummingbirds. Zip, 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 zip. How would you do that, Julian? I just gave a hint with maybe I should take this one and you should take the next one.
Yeah, you take this one.
I love hand isolations. Your hand becomes the thing and it separates from your body. So even, if I am playing a character, sometimes I will isolate my hand and my hand will move as a separate entity than my body. So for the keys, maybe they have wings, but you can just make a focal point by by touching your pointer finger to your thumb, almost like an okay sign. And then people will just watch that, or just having one finger. But I feel like this is good. And then you can do zzz, 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 make those kind of sounds and do sharp movements and sort of have things flit around the room. And you can sort of take your hand out of, do one key, zzz, 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 and then go into another key. And if everyone's doing that, you'll get this magical cloud of things. The next one, perfect for Lumiere, Julian, to you, is a living chess set, where all the chess pieces move and are giant. How would you be a chess piece, Julian, rather than just, I'm not a normal person, I'm a statue of a chess piece. You still can move, you still maybe have a sword or something, but.
Yeah. Well, this might not be how they actually move in Harry Potter, but when you say this, I think like one of the big actions that you might want to do here is like while you're still, you might want to like squash yourself down a little bit or like appear a little bit shorter. And the movement that I have in my head is when the chess pieces move, they like levitate a little bit off of the board and they like just go to where they're going. Like if you play video game chess, like this is how they do it. And so you might want to like then flex up your body so you're like fully extended, and this can like represent the levitation, and try to move forward with like minimal like leg extension. You're like keeping your upper body as stiff as possible, and you're just moving forward and then plomping back down onto the piece that you want to go to. So like like Hal says, it's so much about like the moment of separation from the ground, and then the moment of going back onto the ground.
All right. The next challenge is a fun one where the physical improvisers get to decide what happens with the plot. There are 7 little vials of things that can either be poison, or nothing, or they can be something that will allow you to walk through a burning gateway. So the burning gateway would probably be played by the characters. And depending on which one you drank, you don't know whether you're going to burn or walk through it until until the fire decides. Kaelyn, how would you be a fire?
Ooh, yes, yes. Well, of course, the sound's going to play like the crackling, then kind of like the escalation of it. I started using like my fingers, kind of like showing the tips of the flames, like all the sparks flying. And yeah, starting like using again, I love flowy fluid motion, kind of following how like a fire is like kind of like fluid and like moving, but eventually it can grow and you can combine with other people to make a fire as it grows bigger and bigger. And when it escalates, you could be like off the ground and moving and like jumping and like moving really quickly around, which is so fun.
All right. I skipped over the room with the dead troll in it because we don't need that room. The final room, Kaelyn, really special. The Mirror of Erised. How would you play a magic mirror that differs ever so slightly from the person, showing what they most desire, but that also kind of is the person? You have played some very memorable mirrors at different points.
Yes, yes. Oh my gosh. Wait, can we talk about that first?
Sure. In Kaelyn's audition for the group, I guess technically I was the mirror in this situation, but any mirroring situation, both of you are the mirror. There was a scene where Kaelyn was a girl who's nervous about going to school, and I was her reflection, who was rather mean. And what happened in that scene?
Yeah. And kind of what was interesting was this is a scene from nothing. So it started without us talking and we just started mirroring each other. And then it kind of became we kind of like we found out that the reason the girl was nervous for school was because her mirror had been kind of like self-sabotaging her. And yeah, like building up like these insecurities and these fears, and like the mirror, her reflection had been the one that was really pulling her down, which was crazy. And then at the end, she was like, she's like, no, she's like, I'm gonna be free from this. I know what you are now. Like, I know what you've done. And then an emotion walks towards the mirror and smashes the mirror, which was crazy because then we were both like doing the smashing motion at the same time.
Yeah, our fists slammed into each other, but my body collapsed to the floor and broke up into shards. Whereas leaving Kaelyn alone on stage, it was cool.
Yeah, this is an exercise that if you've done like theater, you have probably already done, but we're talking about mirroring. That is also like a great exercise that you can do to just warm your body up and think more about how you like might mirror things. So the basic way that I've done it is that 2 people pair up. First, you mirror each other, so you're facing each other. Anything one person does, there's one person who's leading, so person A might move, and then person B has to mirror that. You might switch. Person B leads, and then person A follows that, and you're trying to mirror it as closely as possible. The goal is you kind of keep switching back and forth, and eventually, you might try to start switching so quickly that it's not clear who's leading or following, and basically you're both mirroring each other with nobody leading. I think Hal and Kaelyn, you guys are both the lords of this exercise, so you can say a little bit more about it if you want, but this is a good one to do.
I'm going to hit this exercise hard in our intro series. So I think we'll get it eventually later.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, we're talking about, okay, the Mirror of Erised. Yes. How would I do it? Yeah, I think definitely like with this like similar mindset of like we're both mirroring each other, very shared control. Be super cool. What I'm thinking about like visually how to set it up so the audience can see. Like, I think there's many ways you could do it where it's like you like could shift and show at different points of time where it's like you see one person's back, but then like one person you only see their back, but the other person you do see the reflection, but it's like a little off so that you can make sure you can see them, and then you could like at important points you could switch, so be very like watching each other. You could also do where you're like yeah, you see your profiles facing each other, is also super effective. Yeah, so like yeah, I'm also a very like visual person. So I think like so much of physical improv is also visual. Like how were we like setting up the angles and like staging. But yeah, that's what I would do. And probably whoever's the mirror, make it more apparent that you are the mirror by like perhaps you might talk in a more magical, mystical way. Sound again super helpful. So
You could also do the slow rotate. Where as the scene goes on,
Oh.
that's what I thought you were going to go for. But we got to mention, I know, Julian, we got to speed along, but we have to mention slow motion. You need to know how to do it.
mm.
It's key to all of these things. So many of the high intensity things you can't do without it. Say a line, drop your voice into a lower register and slow down, and then everyone knows to, and then you pop out. So maybe you shoot the bullet. Your voice, I'm gonna shoot you. Bullet comes flying across the stage, being represented by your hand. And the second they duck backwards, the bullet goes over their face, and then zoop, it's back into fast motion. And you're fighting again. So it's another click on, click off. Really useful for crossing thresholds and for chases and for basically everything.
Spoilers.
Combat, especially.
Watch Hamilton on Disney Plus to see them do literally exactly that.
The slow motion bullet.
Yeah, no, that they do that for both of the duels.
But we do need to talk. We need to give you the hero's journey equipment of like what we actually mean. Cross the threshold. Basically, there should be some sort of barrier that the hero either chooses to cross or is thrown across.
Yeah,
and kind of quadrant theory. If your hero is in a world that fits, they should probably be forced to cross the threshold. Either someone comes and destroys their world and they need to go save it, or, they accidentally Lightning McQueen style get sucked across, flushed away, or sucked out of the car. And if you're in a world that doesn't fit, you probably are going to be more screwing up your courage and intentionally traveling across whatever, physical thing will keep you from coming home.
Yeah, so there's different classifications, and there's more than we're gonna say. So I recommend that you do look at Vogler's The Writer's Journey for like a full breakdown of these. But largely, like temptation is one of them that might lead a hero to like go on their journey, and the temptation could be like something that they have to like grow to overcome, or could be something positive. But yeah, basically they're tempted by something they see or something that they're told, and that temptation leads them on the journey.
And you're talking call to adventure now, right? A little bit before the crossing the threshold. Something is going to, you'll do maybe 3 scenes in the ordinary world, and then something will trigger your hero to want to come. Someone will introduce, there's this super challenge where they're giving $50,000 to whoever can sail their boat around the world. And then you're like, okay, I know where I am.
Yeah. And this is like, maybe the flip side of this is like, if your character has some sort of like lack or need, temptation makes me think of like lack or need, or Charlie Bucket in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. He's like kind of a sad, poor little boy who like just wants, some candy and to like see this wonderful world. So that's like an example where I would describe that as temptation, but it's not like a negative thing necessarily. There's also disorientation, which is I think kind of the Lightning McQueen style or flushed away style of you're just kind of thrown into the new world, and you have no choice. You're just physically kind of put there. And the final one that I want to flag is no more options. So you can talk about this one, Hal, if you'd like.
You can go for no more options.
Okay. Which is you are like held up against some sort of, Hal I know all of my references are like this, but Over the Hedge, if you've ever seen that movie, the main character is presented with a no more options in the beginning. He's given an ultimatum by this bear. The raccoon is given the ultimatum, like, you have to give me back all this food or I'm going to eat you. And that leads the raccoon to, go venture over the hedge and, talk to the other animals.
And the hedge is the threshold, right? That's a
Exactly.
very
It's
dramatic.
a perfect.
It's a threshold in the title, so you nailed that one.
Yeah. So watch
Kaelyn,
over
how
the
do you
hedge.
play a hedge? I'm a hedge.
But yeah, those are some kind of broad strokes reasons that a hero might go on their journey, and descriptions of the call to adventure. So specifically, the part in the show where it becomes clear to the hero that there is some journey that they might go on.
And I'm going to do some more Harry Potter because we're deep in this episode.
Yeah.
Like, one of the things that happens in the Harry Potter world is that you have the Muggle world, and then slowly a few little magical hints start to happen, where like the glass disappears at the zoo and a snake gets out, or like you see more and more owls are crowding on the street, and that's something you can kind of do in the ordinary world, where like it gets slowly, these like little things from the magical world are seeping into your world. Or maybe it's the no more options thing, and literally it's the villain's army, and you're getting. But maybe you just first see like a weird little shadow or a weird little rabbit who's saying, I'm late, and then the choice to heralds, we forgot, like the oftentimes there's one person who comes along. Maybe it's the mentor, or maybe it's just someone who's like a rabbit who's like, come follow me, I'm a rabbit, and that's the thing that causes you to but someone coming along saying, oh, you should go on an adventure. Or
yeah, and that's not the other herald, you improv people. It's with an E.
Kaelyn, how would you seep some magic? Oh, go.
Oh no, honestly, yeah, the Alice in Wonderland cross threshold. That's gonna be one of my favorite cross thresholds of all time. And imagine improvising that, like falling out of a pool with all these objects flying at you. Insane. It's just super fun.
Yeah. How?
Go.
No, go.
I'm moving it along and asking if we have any final things to say.
Move it along.
Okay. Do we have any final things to say? We mostly talked today about physical improv. We didn't, hit the call to adventure too hard, but there's not too much to it. If you understand like the kinds of calls to adventure, you can try practicing scenes where you're just giving the call to the hero. And if you want to get deep into the hero's journey, like literature, there's the refusal of the call. We might talk more about that in the future, but when we did the show, we didn't include that as one of the stages. But feel free to read up more on that. I think the most important thing from this episode is get your body loose. Try some of this physical improv stuff. Please try some of the exercises that we alerted you about. And yeah, I also want to open it up. Kaelyn, we haven't done this with our guests, but Hal, I think we should do it. Is there anything you want to shout out, or just any general messages you want to impart to the audience about this or anything else?
Yeah, I think, I have, some stuff I'd love to say. I think especially like figuring out how to make it work for everyone is super important. I know like some people might be like, oh, I'm not as like physically improv aligned, like I'm not comfortable with this. Totally understandable. I think it's really important to talk with your ensemble about like consent. Like maybe some people are like, oh, like I don't think this is for me because like I can't really lean over for long periods of time. Totally okay. I know we put emphasis on making things look really cool, but what's most important is how the players are feeling. And if we can work in a way where we know like people's different like conditions and things like that, and like, okay, this is comfortable for you, this is not comfortable for you, really working with that is super awesome. Like thinking about how to like make it work in terms of like sustainability too. There's also like, if you don't have to be stuck playing a table on stage for the entire scene, there's clicking in and clicking out. Like come in to set the scene, and when you feel like it's not really part of, like it's not super key to what's happening anymore, click out. And maybe they start talking about the table again, okay, click back in. So you don't have to be stuck doing anything for a long period of time. Or if you're like in a not comfortable position, you can be like, you can say like, the table leans down on its leg, something like that, to make it work for you, I think is a super important part of this, like, that I want to make this open to anyone, that physical improv is for everyone. Yeah, and also like if you're interested in exploring more of this, I feel like a lot of connections this whole physical improv aspect has is like with dance and movement. I want to give a huge shout out to like Common Origins, which was like my first time trying dance at Stanford. Non-audition dance group was so great. I especially want to thank my friend Claire Yu, who really helped me like think more about dance and like the importance of like our body as like expression and really tapping into like the physical aspect of art and movement. And also just animated worlds. Like I think if I'm a huge fan of animated worlds like Over the Garden Wall, Gravity Falls, Midnight Gospel, Fantastic Mr. Fox, things like that I think are also super in this realm. So if you're interested in any of those things, this is a super great way to bring it into improv. Or if you're not interested in those things, this is a great opportunity to explore them.
One of the great things about the Lumiere was we split up to do it, so people could opt in, and then we now have those Lumiere people. So like almost every show that Kaelyn plays in, she is doing this kind of work, and you can look for that in auditions. Like ideally, what you're doing with auditions are building an ensemble, and if you see someone who has a lot of skills of playing in a really physical way, onboarding that person and then also teaching them some of this stuff so that they can kind of, and maybe there's someone else who can't move their body very well but can do the sound effects really well, and like you're working as a team with whatever you've got.
Well, we want to thank you, Kaelyn, for joining us on this episode of Muprov Musings, and we want to thank you, listeners, for listening.
This has been, oh, unless Kaelyn.
Wait, what? No, I was gonna say, yeah, this is super fun. And yeah, I'm super excited for this episode.
This has been
Muprov
Musings. So my sign off is what I've been up to lately. I've been here for the arts intensive at Stanford. It's like before school starts. Like you just get to do like immerse yourself into art. What's been really cool about it is I've been taking a filmmaking intensive, which is super awesome. Also with a former founding simp, Adam Tobin. He's incredible. And it's been really interesting kind of learning about like, yeah, like it's the narrative is all the same in improv and film, but like there are some differences in like how like I was telling Julian this earlier. I feel like film is just so visual. It's really focused on like what angle and what composition and what's the lighting like versus improv because you don't have access to all that stuff and like costumes and like the setting. It's so much more in the emotional, which is super cool. I don't know. I just love that because I was talking with a friend and they're like, because when you take away all this stuff on the surface, like all this visual stuff, like it's what's really the core of it. Yeah.
That's sick.
Is there anything that you can port over, any technique from film that you're like, I could do this in improv?
I feel like it would be it. Like I think composition, like how I'm really talking about physical improvisers, like how are you gonna line yourself? What angle? Where are you on the stage? I think about composition is something that I want to think more about. It's hard to do in real, like doing on the spot, but I think that's a super cool aspect because like how things are composed on a stage give a different tone. But also like I feel like something I want to do is like more snappy dialogue. Like I feel like when you're first starting out improv, it is important. Like let's take it slow, be happy, healthy, well, like no new trouble. But I would be really interested in just like starting a scene where it's like you cut right into like it's like a fast pace. You're in the middle of a fast paced conversation. Um, Film dialogue is like you have to be so efficient with what you're writing. And in improv, we're not as efficient because we're figuring out what this is about, which is totally fair. But I think I would like to try that, like with like yeah like people like who have been doing like improv long enough and have a connection with each other where we can kind of mind read and get on the same page.
Yeah, snappy dialogue.
Yeah.
see me now? I sure thought you cared. All these times they're changing. Oh, and my mind is rearranging. Can't you see me now? Like you always did. Can't you see me now? I just wanna be with you. When the times they seem so crazy, can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? See me now. Can't you see me now? Oh, can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? Like you did back then. Can't you see me now? I remember way back when. Oh, and times they are changing. You know, things are rearranging. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? Everything is changing. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now?